Welcome to Smaointe Sathairn, the Learn Irish online show which comes out every Saturday morning, in which I'm going to be talking a bit about the broader principles and ideas around learning Irish and hopefully giving you the tools to make it a lot easier for you to increase your level in speaking, listening, writing and reading in the language going forward. The odd numbered episodes, that's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 and so on, are all going to be available for free on the Gaeilge Weekly feed, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and wherever else you might listen to the show. But to get access to the even numbered episodes as well, you'll have to sign up as a Learn Irish Online member. Patreon.com/Learn Irish Online to begin your free trial today. It's only €7 a month plus VAT from then on in, and you get access to a load of different shows, not just Smaointe Sathairn, but Ishtarish, Leirish, Ag Astrú, Button na Ró, Lífocht, Topic Breakdown, bonus episodes of Gaeilge Weekly, and so on. Links will be down below in the description. Very much hope you enjoy the show and get some benefit from it. Right, welcome back to episode number 3 of Smaointe Sathairn, and this is going to be the second one that's going out for free on the Gaeilge Weekly feed. So hello Gaeilge Weekly listeners on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Castbox, wherever else you might be listening, but also obviously like all the episodes of Smaointe Sathairn, including the even numbered episodes, it's out on the Learn Irish Online membership along with a whole host of other shows and resources over there or over here, depending on where you're listening to it. So today I want to talk a little bit about listening and I suppose comprehending, if you wanted. It's one thing to listen to someone speak Irish, but it's another thing to comprehend it and to understand what's being said. And the more I talk to different students, the more I talk to people signed up to the Learn Irish Online membership or people in my life who say they want to get better at Irish or even at other languages, the more I realise the vast majority of people just want to be comfortable in conversation. And what does that mean? There's two parts to that, like we mentioned on episode number 1, when we went more so into the speaking side of it. One part is the speaking and being able to express whatever idea comes to your mind, but then the other half is being able to understand pretty much everything that the other person says, certainly the meaning of what they're saying, even if you can't get every single word or every little inflection here and there. That's absolutely fine. You might never get that 100%, even when you're speaking in your first language and listening to someone speak your first language. You might not even pick up every word, but you understand the general idea of what they're saying, what they're asking you, what they're trying to express. So I would certainly say for listening, more so than the other sections of the language, which are speaking, reading and writing, with listening there's no quick fix, not to say that there is for any of the other ones, but what I mean by that is listening more so than the other 3 pillars of the language, as I call them, is a numbers game. It is all about how many hours you put in. Now, of course, one person could put in 5 hours of listening over a period of time and get more benefit than another person putting in 20 hours. But in general, to get better at listening, as simple as it sounds, you have to listen to more and more and more and more. Now, you might be thinking, Liam, I've tuned into this podcast or I even pay my membership fee. Why am I paying it just to hear you say to listen, or to listen better, you have to listen more? That's obvious, but you'd be amazed by the amount of people that don't do it. And I think one of the big issues is people get discouraged at an early age, and sometimes people aren't 100% honest with themselves. So I'll give you an example I've mentioned before on 1 or 2 different things on the membership over the last year. And I think I was talking about reading, not to do with reading Irish, just reading in my own personal life. And about a year ago, I was always kind of telling people, or even telling myself, yeah, I'm a reader. I love reading. I like doing stuff away from the screens. I love sitting down with a book and just reading through a physical book for 20 minutes, half an hour, however long. I really getting sucked into a book and I get through a lot of them. And then one day I kind of stopped myself and asked myself, hold on, over the last week, let's say, how much time have I actually spent reading a book? And I thought through it and I realized there was only one time over the previous week where I had actually sat down and started reading, and that time it was only for 10 minutes. Now, since then I've got better, but my point here is that often we can tell ourselves we're doing something and we can identify something. Oh, I'm learning Irish. Oh, I listen to a lot of Irish. I really try and improve my listening. But you do have to be honest with yourself. And some people, you'll be honest with yourselves and say, yeah, I do listen to a lot. But if you really think about it over the last week as you're listening to this, and no kind of excuses. Some of this podcast may sound a bit harsh, by the way it comes across. I don't mean it in that way. I'm just trying to get you to really question yourself in terms of where you're at. It's not to make anyone feel bad, but it's just so we have full kind of clarity and honesty in terms of where we're at. So ask yourself over the last week, and no kind of excuses in terms of, I was on holiday or I was doing this or whatever. If there's really something big, then let's say the previous 7 days before that, but pick out 7 days, whether it's the last 7 days or the 7 days before that. How much time have you spent listening to Irish? And how many different speakers have you listened to? Have you listened to speakers from all three of the main dialects? Have you listened to kind of fully fluent speakers of different levels? How many different voices would you say you've heard? Now, you might answer that question and say, yeah, Liam, I've listened to speakers from different dialects and different types of speakers, different levels of speakers over the last week. And I've listened to a good bit. I'd say 5 out of the 7 days. I've listened to at least 10 or 15 minutes every day, which is a good amount. I always say consistency and small but often, or little but often. That's the phrase in English, isn't it? Rather than doing a big 1 hour or 2 hours where you're probably going to lose focus after the first 15 minutes anyway, and only doing that once a week. But I think firstly, you have to be honest with yourself in that, because listening is a numbers game, like literally pretty much any skill in the world. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And again, a lot of that sounds quite simple, but you'd be amazed by how many people don't do it. So it's just to kind of get yourself, I suppose, asking yourself these questions firstly. And then I suppose another big issue for people is even people who do listen a lot, they get discouraged. They might turn on Radio na Gaeltachta, which is probably the hardest platform to understand, to be honest, if we're to pick one radio station, a TV station, or podcast or whatever. In general, Radio na Gaeltachta is the toughest to understand, because for their radio programs, they pretty much only employ native speakers from specific Gaeltachts in the country, and normally native speakers over the age of 40 as well. So it's a slightly older type of Irish. So let's just say you turn on Radio na Gaeltachta, or you have done recently, and you've gone, geez, I feel so far off. This is discouraging. Not only can I not understand it, I can't even pick up little words here and there. And this is even the dialect. I grew up maybe in Mayo, and I'm listening to a Connemara speaker. This is my kind of most local dialect, should be the easiest for me, and I find it hard to understand. But again, ask yourself the question. This one's a bit of a nicer question. Well, how long have you actually been learning Irish? Okay, maybe you learned it at school. Maybe you're now 30 years old and you've kind of gone back to it for the first time. So you had a bit still when you went back to it, but you only went back to it 6 months ago, or even 1 year ago. Well, if I had played a bit of piano when I was young, and then I'd gone back to it, or I went back to it now just over the last 6 months, I wouldn't expect to be able to play Beethoven's Second Symphony by now. Do you know what I mean? You do have to be realistic in terms of, well, where are you at? Should you? Who would? If you were looking at someone else, let's say not looking at yourself, but let's say you had a friend and they said, yeah, I've gone back to learn Irish over the last 6 months. I never had a great level of skill, but okay-ish, whatever, and now I've gone back to it, doing bits and pieces after work or at the weekends. And yeah, I just can't seem to understand everything that's being said on Radio na Gaeltachta. You'd probably say to them, well, don't worry, there's loads of time to get there in the future. If you could understand everything on Radio na Gaeltachta, you'd be able to understand pretty much every single word on every single independent podcast, everything on Radio Rira and Radio na Litha. If we're just concentrating on radio for a moment, 90% of people you'd bump into who you had a conversation in Irish with, you'd be able to understand all of them. So, well, realistically, after 6 months, or even if it's a year, 2 years, whatever, should you be at that level? Probably not in most people's case. So I think being realistic and being honest and being clear, rather than just basing it off emotion of, oh, I feel like I should be able to understand this. Oh, I've put in so much effort into learning the language and I still can't understand it. Well, let's be honest where we are. So firstly, are you listening to stuff every week, every day? Are you listening to enough stuff? Let's just say a general target. It depends again how you're doing it, but maybe listening to 20-25 minutes of Irish content. When I say listening, I mean really tuning into it rather than just having it on in the background. You should always be able to tell me more or less over the last minute what's been going on. Even if you haven't been able to understand it, whatever, even just 1 or 2 words to kind of prove you're actually tuned into it rather than it's just on in the background. So let's say 20-25 minutes to keep it manageable, to keep it a certain amounts of time that we can keep focused for rather than drifting off over the course of an hour, 20-25 minutes, 5 times a week, let's say. That may be a bit on the upper end of what people can fit into their daily lives. We're all busy, and don't believe any of this nonsense you hear from different linguists or teachers online saying you have to do 2 or 3 hours a day or whatever. No one's got time for that. Even if you've got a really free schedule, even to put in that amount of time per day, it's going to be very tough, and you might be spending other time practicing speaking and whatever. Even if you could do 20 minutes, right, really focusing in on the content you're listening to 5 times a week, that's really, really good. Okay, that's good. So if you can use that as a general outline, a general goal to go for, again, adjust it to what your own situation is so that it actually fits in with your life and you're enjoying the practice that you're doing. If you're only going to enjoy it, doing it 3 times a week, do it 3 times a week. Do it in a way where you'll enjoy it, because if you enjoy it, you'll want to do it more. If you want to do it more, you'll stick to it without even having to try, without even having to force yourself to do it. So let's say if you're doing that, and you're listening to a good bit, like we said, well, you're going to get better over time. But let's say if it's on a scale of 0 to 100, let's say if you're at a 20 out of 100 now, in terms of your listening abilities, let's say that could even represent out of 100 speakers, you can understand 20 of them really well, the 20 most kind of basic speakers. Well, again, it is just about sticking with it, because the more you practice, the more you listen. And again, this might sound quite obvious, but you'd be amazed by how many people forget about this. It's not going to get more difficult. Okay, if I give you different podcasts to listen to now, and you listen to them all, and you think all of them are kind of out of reach, I struggle to really understand what's going on in most of them, well, just pick one, and then just stick with it over the next week. And if you came back to me after listening to an hour or two of it in a week's time, would you say to me, it's gotten harder, it's gotten more difficult? No way. At the very least, you'd say it's just as confusing as it was at the start. And if that's the case, it's probably you're listening to something just a bit too difficult. So, you've these different things, let's say 3 different levels, where you can listen to something that's too easy, where you're not getting too much benefit from it. Listen to something that's kind of way out of reach, that it's so difficult that even just listening to it isn't really helping you. Or you can listen to something where you're getting bits and pieces of it, but not all of it, and that's the zone we want to be in. So if you come back to me in a week, there's no way you're going to say it's more difficult, and realistically you're not going to say, well, it's the same difficulty that it was. You're going to say it's easier, even if it's only a tiny bit easier. You're just catching a few of the filler words and you're still not really understanding a lot else. Perfect, that's a step forward. All it is just keeping those steps forward to continue. And again, what happens to people, I think, is people, and I heard this quote from somewhere else, so I'm not claiming it for myself because it's a great quote. People overestimate what they can do in the short term, and people underestimate what they can do in the long term. So if we take that example, people look at something like Radio on the Gaeltacht or just any old podcast and kind of say, why can't I understand this? Or I've been learning now for 3 weeks. I kind of made a decision 3 weeks ago around Sathairn Gaeilge. You know what, I'm really going to focus in on the Irish, but this is just too tricky. Well, yeah, but it's been 3 weeks. What do you really expect? And I would ask yourself the question, okay, be honest with yourself. If you have been doing the practice that you're meant to be doing, whatever level you've decided that is, because it's different for everyone, what have you learned over the last 3 weeks? And it can honestly be a good idea. Make a list. And you might say, okay, I've learned I did this thing where I learned the most 100 common words in the language. I've probably listened to a few different podcasts, and I do find this person that I listen to on the podcast a bit easier to understand. I catch some of the words when they're not speaking too fast and when they're allowed to speak. The other guests on the podcast, tricky, but maybe 1 or 2 small things have gotten a bit easier, but in general, it's just still very hard. Well, hold on, that's actually quite a bit you've learned in those 3 weeks since you picked back up the language. There's 52 weeks in the year. Let's say a few weeks you might not bother practicing, or you might be on holidays or whatever. Let's be realistic again about this. Let's say 46 weeks in the year. Or let's do a multiple of 3s. This is better. 45. Okay? So 45 weeks in the year. So if you've learned all that in the 3 weeks, imagine another 3 weeks. Okay? So 6 weeks in total. So you've learned all those things in the first 3 weeks, the 100 most common words, and you got to grips with the prepositions better, which just helps you understand a bit better, to focus in on listening. Again, you get more filler words, and when this person's talking slow, I do find it a bit more comfortable than before. Well, Add on another 3 weeks to that, and imagine it's the same amount of progress. Then another 3, then another 3, then another 3. You're doing fairly well at this point, okay? Doesn't mean, again, you're going to be able to put on Radio Lugat, the TG Cahar without subtitles or whatever and be able to understand everything, but you're going to be a good bit along. Maybe after those 15 weeks, now all of a sudden it's, yeah, that person I mentioned, she's a bit easier to understand. I can actually understand 80% of what they say. I can almost always follow along. The other person on the podcast who's a bit trickier, I am going to bits and pieces, certain words. I can't link the words together. I can't really follow what they're saying, but I can kind of get the individual words. My brain's just not quick enough to link them together. But that's a lot better than where you were, and that's only 15 weeks, okay? And you multiply that by 3. Again, think of all the improvement there. We've gone from understanding basically nothing to being able to understand, again, in this hypothetical example, one person fairly well, kind of 80% of what they say. The other person, we're getting there, we're making inroads. Well, again, multiply that by 3. Over the long term, and that's not even that long term, we're talking about 1 year there, you might be learning Irish for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. That's a massive improvement. But what happens, again, is people do something for 3 weeks. You could talk about this in loads of things in life, not just trying to understand Irish better. But people look at the first 2 or 3 weeks and go, I'm just still not getting it. Well, again, look, imagine it was someone external. Imagine it was someone else. Would you really be saying to them, yeah, you should be able to kind of understand most Italian or most Spanish or whatever, most of the speakers in that language after 3 weeks? No, not at all. You just, once you're making some type of progress in that 3 weeks, and then you can replicate that over the next 3 weeks or over the next week or whatever time period you want to look at, well, over the course of a year, that's going to be quite a bit. So people really underestimate how much you can get done and how much improvement you can make in the long term. So again, we need to stay consistent with it over a decent period of time. And then if we break it down, okay, I might have that year, that 52 weeks or the 45 weeks or whatever. So I break it down to 1 week. Well, what do I need to do? Again, it's not a huge amount, but I just need to kind of be listening to a bit, 15, 20 minutes, maybe not every day, but most days during the week. That would be my kind of minimum. Make sure you're listening to 15 minutes at least every second day or 4 days a week, let's say. And then the upper scale, quite good, would be if you're listening 25 minutes for, let's say, 5 days a week and really focusing in on it. Again, 15, 20 minutes when you're focusing in, you're concentrating on everything that's being said, maybe even pausing sometimes, rewinding if you have the freedom to do that, is much better than just an hour in the background on your commute if you can't actually focus in on it on your commute. So that's the thing, guys. It is, I know a lot of this sounds simplistic, but again, it is just a numbers game in a lot of things in relation to listening. So listen to more and more and more, and it will get easier. It's not going to get more difficult. So that's key. So be honest with yourself in terms of how much you're listening to, and be honest with yourself in terms of where you're at, in terms of how long have you been learning the language or relearning the language or really focusing in on it? And can you understand better than a month ago? Even if you can't understand most people, that's fine. But is it still better or at a higher level than it was a month ago? And is it at a higher level than 2 months ago? If not, well, there's a good chance you're either not listening to enough or maybe not listening to enough different speakers. And I'm going to get into specifics in terms of how we can practice listening or what we should be doing for practicing listening now in just a moment. But it's probably either that you're not listening to enough, or you're just being too hard on yourself or kind of forgetting where you were a few months ago. I find it actually really interesting with some of my students, because the few students I still do one-on-one lessons with now, I send them a copy of their notes, everything we learned in the lesson, everything we covered after the lesson. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll go back to the lesson we had on that week a year ago. So let's say as I record this, it is the 17th of April. So if I have a lesson with someone today, I'll go back to last April and check what we were doing. And I'm amazed by how basic the stuff we were doing 1 year ago seems. Because again, when you're meeting this person every week, and for you, you're just meeting yourself or thinking about your own level of Irish every day even, you don't notice your progress. But if you have a way of going back to something, maybe if there was a podcast you really listened into a few months ago, go back to that if you can find it and see, is it a lot easier for you? Because if you're putting in the hours and really focusing in on it while that person is speaking or while you're listening, then it should get better. Just stay consistent with it and be patient with it, and over time it will get better. And I know that sounds so basic, but you'd be amazed by how many people don't do it. You won't meet many people who have listened to a lot of a language, who already have some level. Of course, you have to have some level in the language to do a lot of this, but who've listened to a lot over time, over 6 months or a year, and get to that and say, I'm not any better at understanding. At the very least, they'll be a bit better at understanding, and you just got to keep on moving forward and think every time you listen to 20 minutes or half an hour, it's almost like there's a few more people you're going to be able to understand. If we say, let's say there's 100,000 people who speak Irish to a good level, that's just, that might not be a real number, that's a wild guess, might not be too far off though. Let's say there's 100,000 people. You might be able to understand 5,000 at the moment to a good level. But if you go and listen to an episode of Gaeilge Weekly or whatever for the next hour, maybe you've taken out another 10 or 20 people. You've improved your listening to a certain extent over that hour, that you've learned whatever, these words or that words. If you've had a bit of a eureka moment of going, oh, that word is the same word as that word, it's just different pronunciation. Maybe that's another 15 or 20 people or 15 or 20 conversations that you could have where you'd feel comfortable in. So just keep on moving forward. Just keep on putting in the hours. Don't be thinking about these big jumps. Stay consistent over time. And again, be realistic. Be honest with yourself. Are you listening to enough to actually justify, or to be able to feel justified in saying, I should be better at this? Okay, so a few of the really key things, because that's my main point. I've rambled on about it a bit, but here are a lot of key things in relation to listening to the language. One, you need to listen to more than one person. And I think this might be an issue for some people who listen to Gaeilge Weekly. I'm really appreciative of listeners of Gaeilge Weekly, and thank you very much for listening. But some people have said to me, I'm really good at understanding you now, but then I tune into another podcast and it's quite tough. So thank you for listening to Gaeilge Weekly, but listen to other stuff as well. Listen to other speakers, other dialects, older people, younger people. Even if some of them you don't understand, or even all of them you don't understand that well, mix it up. Do not have a situation, guys, this is important, where, let's take the dialects, it's an easy example. Do not have a situation where you're thinking, I like listening to Munster and Connacht and I'm kind of used to that. I can't understand Ulster, so I don't bother listening to it. It should be the exact opposite. If there's a certain dialect or a certain speaker or show that you find tricky, and again, it can't be something ridiculously hard where you're just not going to pick up anything, that'll come with time, but something where you go, I find that really tricky and really taxing, I can get tiny bits of it, but that's it. Listen to more of that. Whether it's based on the dialect, or it's an older speaker, or sometimes younger speakers. People find younger speakers very fast, and let's say older speakers, the issue is the lack of clarity in a lot of languages. So older speakers speak slow but not that clear. Younger speakers clear but fast. So one of those might catch you out. Listen to that, attack that, make that your strong point, okay? Because otherwise you're going to have a situation where, you know, if you think about real life in terms of talking to people, you can control what you speak. You can't control what dialect the other person speaks. You want to get to a point where it doesn't matter if it's an Ulster speaker, Munster speaker, Connacht speaker, one of the sub-dialects within there, standard speaker, younger speaker, older speaker, fully fluent, native, non-fluent. It doesn't matter who speaks to you. You want to be in the position where you can understand it. So you have to listen to all those different ones. And that can be a good thing about the radio, because the radio, you can put it on, you don't know who's going to be on there. Or podcasts like Shall LaShawn, where there's a different guest on every week, Shall Dahi over on TG Car Player, where again you can put on a random episode and each one is going to have a different guest, someone with a different type, a different bloss, as we say in Irish. So that's key. Do not run away from what's tricky. Attack it. Get rid of that anxiety of, the Ulster Irish is very tough. It's not going to be as tough after you've listened to 3 or 4 hours of it over the next few weeks. It's, again, only going to get easier and easier. Attack your weakest point. Okay, that's key. Spotify read along. A lot of people don't know about this, guys, but if you listen to your podcast on Spotify, and I recommend doing so in Irish for this, is that a lot of podcasts, including, let's say, Gaeilge Weekly, have an automatically generated transcript. And the one for Irish is actually pretty good. So if you listen to, let's say, Shall LaShawn or Gaeilge Weekly, or I think Gaeilge's podcast has it as well, there will be, if you scroll down on Spotify, an automatically generated transcript of what's being said. Now, it's not perfect, of course. Not everything is picked up, or not everything is translated. Well, it's not translated at all because it's from Irish to Irish. Not everything is transcripted correctly or written down correctly. It often, for example, if I said tá sé, it uses the sé as the number 6 instead of se fala. But a lot of it will be correct, and it can be a really good thing to help you follow along. Take it with a pinch of salt. As I said, some parts of it will be incorrect, but in general, it is very impressive considering it's translating, or again, transcripting a minority language. So use that. And if you really like podcasts in Irish, but it doesn't have Spotify Read Along, that's because the creators of the podcast haven't enabled it over on the Spotify Podcasters Creators Hub. So contact them, give them an email, give them a message, say, hey, is there any chance you can enable this? Can you do it through Spotify? It'll help a lot of learners, and so on. Okay, so Spotify Read Along is really good. I don't use Apple Podcasts, but I don't believe they have anything similar, so that can be quite good for listening over on Spotify, or in terms of choosing where you're listening to your podcasts. What else? I think things to note about listening is it's not just good for listening, but it's also good for improving your accent, improving your flow, and improving small stuff that makes you sound a lot more fluent in terms of filler words. So if we look at the accent, first of all, again, especially if you're trying to learn one of the specific dialects, or if you have a connection to, let's say, Donegal or Galway or Cork or Kerry, whatever, listening to speakers from that area, you might hear someone say Ag Déanamh, and you're always saying Ag Déanamh, and then you can pick that up and go, oh, Ag Déanamh. So that's a quite good way, and it's good with getting your speaking better as well, because you realize, oh, that word is pronounced more so like that, or I need to emphasize that a bit more, or you know what, they're using sheshin and shisha a lot instead of she and she. That can be good. Let me use that for the emphasis. So that can be really good, and your flow as well, and filler words. So if you hear someone start a lot of sentences with stoi, stoilum, stocha, well, stuff like that, capum, sheelum, then that's also really good for sounding more fluent, for sounding like you speak at a bit of a higher level, even if it's speaking at a higher level than you actually do, it still sounds good. So it's not just good for listening, it's also good for your own speaking. And people are always asking me, I don't have anyone to practice with, how can I get my speaking better? I know we talked about that in episode 1. There's loads of different ways, but listening to more stuff can also help. Okay, in terms of subtitles, if you're watching on TG Player, people ask me, should I watch with subtitles, without, with English, with Irish subtitles, with both if you can get them? I would say do a bit of everything, do a bit of what you like. Make sure you're challenging yourself. And also I think just the main thing is, I would do a mix. I would do some with Irish subtitles, some with English subtitles, some with no subtitles, some with both if you can find materials with both. But the biggest thing, guys, do not fall into the trap of watching stuff on TG with the English subtitles or even the Irish and thinking you understand it when you actually don't. If you're watching stuff with subtitles on TG that's fine, but don't think, oh, I understand all this, without actually covering the subtitles and then seeing if you understand it. Because some people have that issue, is they're watching stuff and think, oh, I understand all that episode. Because of course, I might say something like, oh, tá rud a cinn. And if you have the subtitles saying, I have something, you're thinking, oh, I understood that. But if that subtitle wasn't there, and I said, tá rud a cinn, you might not know what I'm on about at all. So it's easy when you have the subtitle and you can work backwards and think, it's that word. It's a variant of Agan, he's saying instead of agam. But again, without the subtitles, can you really do it? So just be honest with yourself about that. And again, a lot of this stuff, guys, is about being honest with yourself. Sometimes being a tiny bit harsh with yourself, saying, maybe I'm not doing enough, or maybe I need to do more like this, or this is where I'm at, and maybe I'm not where I'm at, or where I wanted to be because I haven't done enough of X, Y, or Z. So sometimes you do need to be a bit honest with yourself and a bit tough with yourself with this stuff. But as I say, it's not about putting in 2 or 3 hours a day. Not about that at all. Most people do not have that time. It's just being about consistent. As I always say, the biggest thing, if somebody was asked me to sum it up, how to learn a language or how to learn Irish in about 10 or 15 seconds, say speaking, listening, reading, writing, do a bit of each one every week, stay consistent with it, doesn't have to be crazy amounts of hours, and be curious, look up what you don't know. Okay? So, again, to go back to the transcripts example there with the Spotify read along, if somebody says something and you see it in the transcript and you think, I've not seen that word, don't just say, okay, I've not seen it, whatever. Pause, folklore.ie, your physical dictionary, Changlin, whatever you want to use, have one resource we can go to, find out that word, add it to your list, and move on from there. So stay curious. Okay, that's pretty much everything I have here. The one last thing that I would say is key is make sure you're listening to stuff that you like and stuff that you enjoy. I understand this is tougher than other languages. Again, I'm learning Italian at the moment. So let's say, for example, I'm a big Formula One fan. There's loads of podcasts in Italian about Formula One I can listen to. In Irish, because it's a minority language, no one has done a podcast about Formula One yet. So it can be a bit trickier. Obviously, there's less podcasts, less TV shows, less newspapers, blah, 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 in Irish than there is compared to other languages. But there's still a lot of stuff, and you'd be amazed once you really go down the rabbit hole on Instagram and on YouTube and Spotify, different podcasts, Radio Rira, Radio Nalifa, and so on, in terms of how much stuff there is available in Irish. So again, listen to stuff you like. You don't want a situation, let's say you're listening to a podcast for 20 minutes on the bus to work every morning, or on the bus to uni or whatever. Uni, I sound so English now, to college every morning. If it's something where you're putting in your earphones and going, I was going to listen to a bit of music, but I have to listen to this podcast in Irish, change the podcast or find something else. You do not want it to be something you're going to dread, because one, you won't enjoy it, and we all want to just enjoy this process of learning Irish and getting better. That is the ultimate goal of everything here, is to enjoy this, rather than some end goal of to be able to speak to this person in this conversation. Because whatever the end goal is, like anything in life, it's not going to be as good as you think, and once it's done, and you're just going to look to the next thing. So it should be enjoyable, but also if you find something you like, it won't even be a thing of, okay, I have to listen to 20 minutes a day. It'll just be something you'll put on anyway, because you'd want to listen to whatever the topic might be. So rather than looking at all the stuff available in Irish and then going, right, this is one show, this is one podcast, I'll just listen to that every day, do it the other way around. Look at the stuff you're doing in English, or whatever your first language is anyway, and then see, well, what parts of that can I change into Irish? So what stuff am I listening to? Whether it be TV shows, podcasts, radio shows, whatever, or conversations in real life, what ones of those can actually change into Irish? And so on. Okay, so that's a key concept with anything, not just listening. But that is it. Quite a long episode of Smaointe Sathairn. The idea of these podcasts where it was only going to be 20 minutes at the start, but once I get going on this topic, I can go down a lot of rabbit holes, but hopefully they're helpful. I've got some good feedback on the show so far, so I think people are enjoying. And again, if there's anything specifically you want me to cover on the future episodes of Smaointe Sathairn, just let me know. I do want to talk more about kind of this idea of don't get discouraged, and bit by bit, and overestimating the short term, underestimating the long term, and that issue that people have on a future episode for sure. But there's kind of one or two thoughts anyway in this episode on what I think of that. So thank you very much for listening. A reminder, you can get all the episodes. For example, next week's episode 4, will only be available to Learn Irish Online members. You can sign up for a free trial now at patreon.com/Learn Irish Online. You get access to a load of different shows, videos, podcasts, other benefits, Gaeilge weekly bonus episodes as well, over there for just €7 a month after your free trial. Thank you very much for listening. Slán go fóill, slán agus beannacht.